welcome, Susie, and thank you for sharing so much time of your family life with us, and everyone is eager to hear your experiences with homeschooling and whatever you have to say on the topic.
Thank you. Don't worry about babies' noises. I have 8 children, and I love children. We're all here because we love children, so no child noise ever bothers me. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for loving your children enough to be interested in this question. That's why we're all here, because we love children and we want what's best for them. So I wanted to tell you how we decided to homeschool, why we thought that was best for our children, and how it's worked. Because our oldest children are now already 33, 30, 28, so we can see how they have turned out. I think it would be good to begin by praying a Hail Mary to our Mother in Heaven, who's the mother of our children, that she'll help us to know what's best for our children. Maybe, can you lead a Hail Mary? Mm-hmm.
Zdravá Mária,
a požehnaný plod života tvojho Ježiš. Svätá Mária, Matka Božia, pros za nás hriešných, teraz i v hodinu smrti našej.
Thank you. So I want to speak to you first about my story, how I heard about homeschooling, why we decided to begin, why we decided to go on, then why I loved it, then how it worked, what has happened to our children now, especially the older ones, since that's certainly interesting. Then I would like to tell you about what the church has to say about our duty to educate our children and why you should concern yourself with it and maybe even try to change the law so that you can do it. But first, I think you need to have a picture of what it would look like, since probably most of you went to school, send your children to school, and have a hard time imagining what it would look like not to send your children to school. I first heard about homeschooling because my parents had friends who were in Africa. He was the ambassador to Ghana, and so they bought a program from Calvert School, which has supplied homeschooling for almost 150 years to Americans who were abroad. And every year they would get a box for each child with the books and pencils, paper, crayons, and a syllabus that would say what needed to be studied in each subject. So that sounded intriguing, but my parents didn't know anyone who homeschooled. My sister and I went to school, kindergarten through 12th grade, and I never liked school. I was sick very often to stay home with my mother, and she gave me wonderful books to read. She read out loud to my sister, and I had a wonderful home education when I was home. At night, she read out loud literature to us. She made my sister and me memorize poetry. We had a big bulletin board like that, and she put great works of art there, prints of great works of art. For every feast of the church, there would be Frangelico or Giotto, a Titian of that feast. They took us to museums and historical places. They gave us many, many historical novels through which we learned history, because in the United States, they teach American history almost every year. The rest of the world is, in 6th grade, you get world history, and then maybe again once in high school, and otherwise it's American history. So my parents gave us many books of, very excellent books of world history. When I was sick and home, my mother would go to her special closet and bring out things for me to do. I had to stay in bed when I was sick, but I could read, and she would bring me pop-out books of Greek temples or the Roman Forum or of saints, so educational kind of toys, books. So I had a lot of homeschooling at home, although I went to school. When I was in college, I first heard of a movement starting in the United States of homeschooling, and I thought, oh my goodness, if I have children, they could avoid that whole thing, and I could teach them. And that sounded very interesting. At that time, you needed to have a teaching credential, so I got some information about getting a teaching credential, and I thought, well, I might do that after I finish my first degree, my bachelor. I might get a teaching credential so I could teach my children. I actually was not domestic at all. I wanted to be a scientist, to go to Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And I did many chemistry experiments. I had lots of science fair projects. I had mice and rats that I played rock music to and classical music to and measured their metabolism. So I was all set to be a scientist. But my parents persuaded me to go to a small Catholic liberal arts school first, which I was not too happy about. But the first day I was there, I met my husband. So it turned out that I was very happy, and I loved the liberal education there. And after a year, I realized that I really needed to choose between the career I was thinking of and marrying my husband, who wanted to study, first get a degree in philosophy and then in scripture, and it would take many years of graduate school. And I wanted to be, at that time, I wanted to be a scientist and a lay missionary to South America, and I knew my husband-to-be was not cut out to be a lay missionary to South America. He is a professor, Austrian. The only place he could thrive is in a university. So I hadn't ever been very domestic. I never actually changed a diaper till after I was married. I hadn't babysat. But after I fell in love, I became interested in children. And my best friend at college married while I was still there and had her first child. And when I would go to visit her, once a week I would go have dinner at her house. I saw that you can't put children down. I thought, well, I'll be a scientist and my children will be kind of on the side. But I thought children aren't on the side. I realized that if I had children, I wanted to be there with them, for them, and give them the best possible home life they could have. So I had to rethink my plans. And I thought, well, if I'm going to give up a career and be home, I might as well have lots of children. So I might as well have 10 children. When I was growing up, my parents had very good friends who had 10 children. They had only 2, and I loved going to their house for dinner. It was so much more fun. We ran around outside and we played all sorts of games, and I thought, of course, I want my children to have the best, and that was the best. What I didn't realize is if you have 10 children, you're going to be home a long time. So I thought, I'll be home, I'll take total care of my children, I'll homeschool them, and then I'll study again. But our oldest is 33 and our youngest is 13. So we had 2 little boys who died in the middle. So we had 10 children in 20 years, and I'm still homeschooling. I've been homeschooling 25 years, and I have 6 more years to go until my youngest is in university. But eventually I began to study on the side, and when my oldest children were old enough to watch the younger ones while I went to school, I took classes twice a week for 6 years to get a master's, and then for a couple more years to get a licentiate. And now, in a couple days, on May 31st, I'm going for my dissertation defense at the University of Fribourg for my doctorate in theology. And since I got my licentiate, I've been teaching. So I teach 2 afternoons a week at the University of Ave Maria in Florida, where my husband is also a theologian. So I had all these great ideas about having these 10 children and homeschooling them and doing everything just perfectly for them and having the most wonderful family life. And then I had my first child, who was incredibly active, very challenging, very, very willful. And then I had another one 21 months later, and then another one 2 years later. And at that time we were living in Rome because my husband was studying there. And I thought, school all of a sudden looks kind of good. Let's see. In 7 years, he'll be old enough to be gone for a couple hours a day, because he was very intense. every day he woke up with a plan. So then my husband finished that degree, and we moved to Boston, where he was getting a second doctorate in New Testament at Harvard. And my oldest became 7, was old enough to go to school. So I just did, and I was pregnant with our fourth. I just did not have the courage or this physical strength, I thought, to homeschool him. So I sadly sent him to school. And although I have to I enjoyed the break a little bit from intensity and time to concentrate on the others, I found that it wasn't as wonderful as I thought it would be. First of all, in our life there, and most places we've lived, we met, my husband went off to work, and then we met him at evening mass at 5:15. The children would sit on his lap, and he would hug them, and we would go home and have our main meal, dinner, and then he would read out loud to them, maybe play outside with them a little bit, and then we would pray and sing with them and put them to bed. So suddenly, when Johannes, our oldest, was old enough for school, we'd get up early in the morning and rush around to get him. He was going to a little private Catholic school in his uniform with his tie and his lunch with 2 napkins, a cloth one and a paper one, and his homework. Make sure no spots got on it while he had breakfast. We dropped him off at school at 7:30, and then he didn't get out till 3. And he was sitting still for most of that time, and he was a very active boy. So when he came home, then he just needed to move. And I thought, I can't take him to Mass because he's been sitting all day. I can't make him sit another 40 minutes. And then we'd have dinner, and then he had this homework, this awful homework, and I think, why can't they get it done? He's there for so many hours. But of course, he was supposed to read out loud to me a half an hour every day. The teacher had 25 students. She couldn't listen to 25 students read to her half an hour and correct their English is very hard to learn to read because of the phonics. So I thought, if I was homeschooling him, I would do the same. I would make him do these phonics exercises, read out loud, and do a little math. And now I'm spending the same time at night when he's tired and I'm tired. And instead of his father reading to him, we're doing phonics. And so that precious time, they're going to Mass together, they're reading out loud together, was all shrunk. And then we had to quickly say a short prayer, put him to bed so he'd be able to get up early in the morning and go to school. And suddenly our whole family life seemed like it was revolving around school. And we thought, what's really important to us? What do we really want for the children? Isn't it that we want to pass on our faith and our culture? Don't we want to spend time with them? So we were not happy. But I was pregnant. I didn't feel like doing anything about it at the time. And then some friends came to visit us. And they were a little older, had children a little bit older, and they said they had taken their oldest child out of school, and they were so happy. They were homeschooling, and they said immediately, we were better friends with our children. The children were better friends with each other, and we had more time to spend with them doing what we loved. And she gave me a book to read called For the Children's Sake, and I read it cover to cover. I underlined it, and I thought, this is so beautiful. This is what I want for my children. It talked about reading great literature, playing beautiful music to them, having a very short amount of time of intense phonics, mathematics, academic skills, and then having time for beautiful things. Being out in nature a good deal, reading Shakespeare at a very young age. So I read it, I loved it, I thought this is what I want. Next year we're going to try it. So with fear and trembling the next year I tried it, and it went much better than I thought. It wasn't perfectly easy. My oldest was always very challenging. But the funny thing was, he wouldn't let his brother or sister get away with anything. He would say, do what your mother says. So he would give me a hard time, but if they didn't want to do something, he would force them. And then my next one was old enough to teach, and she was thrilled. She couldn't wait, partly to have all that time with me. So I started teaching her in the summer when I wasn't teaching the other one, and she loved that time alone with me every day. It was a special mother-daughter time. And then she was very academic, so she was very easy to teach. As the next one got older, I was then able to read history to them together, do science projects together, take nature hikes. We had nature notebooks where we drew what we saw. Poetry I could read with them together. So many things I did with those three together. And then we had a little gap. We lost 2 little boys. And then we had another 3 children that were very close together. So again, I was able to read many things with them together. Then we had another gap, and then we had 2. So I've kind of had 3 little sets. And those little sets I could do history, science, literature together with. The most challenging thing probably has always been organizing the youngest, or maybe the second to youngest. So a baby, you can carry, you can nurse, you can hold around, but a toddler from 1 to 3, that's really challenging because they need to move, they need to climb, they need to investigate, and they are endangered. So they can't be alone. You can't just leave them alone. So I've had many creative solutions to the toddler situation, and I seem to have had a toddler all the time, and now I still sometimes have toddlers because I have grandchildren. So that's definitely one of the more challenging problems. We lived in Boston for 4 years, and then we moved to South Bend. My husband taught at Notre Dame for 8 years, with 1 year in Germany, and we had 2 more children there. So by the time we left South Bend, we had 6 children, and for a while I was homeschooling 5, which is a lot to homeschool. But I'll tell you a little bit what the day looked like, just so you have some kind of image. First of all, you don't have to get up really early because they don't have to go anywhere. You can have a nice breakfast and pray with them. Read something about the saint of the day. And then my husband and I actually usually would get up before we got anyone else up and exercise, walk or bike ride or hike just by ourselves with the youngest in a snuggly or a sling. Then we would have breakfast together, and that would be a little together time. Then we'd get everyone else up for breakfast, and then I would start laundry. And I would sit with the first child. So I tried to always give each child an hour a day, that they just had me. So I would do what was their least favorite subject, what was hardest with them alone. And I had a schedule for each child where I wrote down what they were supposed to do. So this says what to do in each subject on Monday, what to do on Tuesday. I would have something like this for the children. And my friend who was the first of my friends to get married, who had the baby that made me realize that I couldn't be a scientist and have 10 children on the side. She got interested in homeschooling too, and she started a school for homeschooling called Mother of Divine Grace. In fact, she goes around the world giving talks. And she has now made, which weren't available then for me, syllabi for every grade, first through 12, kindergarten through 12, where she has suggestions of books to use and what to do in them every day. So you don't need to follow it exactly. You can follow it only for some subjects, but it's very helpful. So for instance, it will, arithmetic's fine, lesson 1, but in history, she and I together collected many historical novels. So in 6th grade, my children have all done Egyptian history and read Mara, daughter of the Nile, The Golden Goblet, many historical novels. And the next year, Greek and Romans, again with many historical novels. The next year, Middle Ages. And this is one of the many, many catalogs of homeschooling books in the United States. So many families do homeschooling now, many more than 1 million, that there are many companies that provide products. This one has the books for my friend Laura Berquist's school. So you can buy a syllabus, and then you can order all the books that are on the syllabus here, many of which are historical novels, which you can also get from the library or otherwise. So it will give a grade, and then the books that Laura suggests, and then extra fun things to do on the side. So I start with one child, and one of the older children would usually be watching the toddler, the ever-present toddler, and I would be maybe holding and nursing the very youngest. And then after working with that child, I would tell them what to do on their own, And in fact, they begin to work very well on their own because they know if they get their work done, they can play or read. So they don't have to wait around for anyone. I had one child who would get up very early, 6:30, get all her work done by 10. Even in high school often. She's now a medical school student. Very smart, but she just figured out that she could have more fun if she got the work done fast, and then the rest of the day was hers to play the flute, to read, to sew. So I work with one, tell them what else they have to do, then I go move the laundry, maybe start soup, and then I would work with the next one for an hour. And this one might work with a toddler while I work with this one. The same thing, after I work with this person, tell them what they still needed to do, and then move laundry, do something in the kitchen that needed to be done, move to the next one. So I've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is the most I ever had, because then some got older, went to the university. So I never had more than 5, really, even with 8 children. So we were able to get it all done in the morning. At 1 o'clock, my husband came home for lunch, and we always had our main meal in the evening, so I didn't have to cook in the morning, but we would have leftovers from the night before, or just hot rolls and bread and cheese and ham. So I thought the hot rolls at least make it feel hot, make it feel more like a hot meal. And then from 2 to 5, my children could play with friends. When we lived in Austria for 12 years, we lived in a little house in the mountains, and there I would have to drive them down to the village and either pick up their friends to take home or leave them there. And usually 2 days a week I would take classes or teach classes when I finished my degree, and the other days I would bring children up to play with us. And older ones would always watch over younger ones, so I had some time to study. I always, after lunch, I had an hour for myself. I had tea, I prayed, I studied. Nobody was allowed to come unless there was blood. So the youngest ones were supposed to take a nap, whether they liked it or not, and the older ones could watch the slightly younger ones. And everyone got used to that. You know, what you do routinely becomes routine. And then we would again meet my husband at Mass at 5:15, and bring him home. And after dinner, he would read to the older children. So he read thousands of hours to the children over we've now been married 34 years. So he read The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings, all of it, 7 times through, because he would start it when a child got old enough, the next child got old enough to understand. Also the Narnian Chronicles many times. I don't know if you know the Little House books, like Little House of the Prairie, many times. Frances Hodgson Burnett wrote beautiful books. There are many, many beautiful children's books in English, which I know have been translated. I'm sure there are beautiful Slovakian ones too. But my husband, being Austrian, had not read a lot of the English ones, so he enjoyed very much reading them. So he would sit and read with the older ones, and I would often take the younger ones and bathe them, put them to bed, read a storybook with them. When I had 5 to homeschool at the same time, I would often take the youngest then. We'd go sit on my bed, and I would read storybooks to them and do a little phonics and math then, because I found it hard to get 5 in the morning before lunch. And I absolutely thought afternoon is free. So hiking, reading books that you want, music, but not school. My husband loves music very much, so we would also play music for the children sometimes, instead of read to them and say, listen, here comes the first movement. Now here's the second movement. Look, here's the development of the first movement. So he would teach them to hear, and most of them love music very, very much now and know a great deal about it. We thought one of our children would become a musician, though he's becoming an architect instead. Another child is becoming a singer, though. We also had art prints up. I did many of the things that my parents did for us. So I had, whenever we went to museum, we'd get art postcards. And I bought art postcards that I would put up one for a few weeks, and then another one, and then another one. I would just talk a little bit about it and then leave it up for them to see. And they would get to know many works of art. Then when we go to a great museum, like the National Gallery in London or Kunsthistorische Museum, they'd be so excited it would be like a treasure hunt to find the paintings that they had gotten to know. Poetry, many things it's very efficient, homeschooling, because you're working with one child alone, and you only have to teach them what they need to know. So they don't have to hear what the whole class needs. But you can start right where they left off the day before. If they didn't understand something, you can go over it again. If they understood everything, you can go ahead. So Laura Brookquist, she has for first grade 1 hour. 1 hour in the morning with math, phonics, writing, reading, and then one day a little music, one day a little art postcard. 2 lines of a poem. If you learn 2 lines of a poem a week, you know many, many poems by the end of 12 years. So my children have memorized huge amounts of poetry, including Tennyson, Shakespeare, but just 2 lines a week, or maybe 4 lines when they're older. So it's very efficient, and if you love things, then spending that time with the children, they become interested and love it too. So if you love what you're teaching them, they will love it. Usually. Some of my children have not loved math, unfortunately. Another efficient thing is that the younger children hear the older children, like in the old one-room schoolhouses. So when we would drive down the mountain to meet my husband at Mass, I would have the children each do their poetry. So when the younger children got the same poems, even my youngest child, she would learn all these poems in a week because she'd been hearing them for years. Also Latin vocabulary, I would have them go over their Latin vocabulary in the car. So if you hear it, even if you're not thinking about it and you don't especially want to hear it, by the time you get to that Latin, it's so easy to learn. Many things, even though my last child is my least academic, she had an easy time with many things because she had been hearing her older brothers and sisters doing it. For my Hannah, my youngest, for her 6th grade, she was very interested in ancient Egypt. So she invited 2 other friends who are also homeschooling to do ancient Egypt with them. And over the summer, I didn't say she needed to do this, but she said, what can we do? I gave her something called history buckets for ancient Egypt. And they spent weeks doing crafts on ancient Egypt. And the whole summer, they read novels in ancient Egypt. And I said when they had finished the pile of novels, that they could have an Egyptian day. So they made costumes and jewelry, and they looked up recipes from ancient Egypt, and they made stuffed quail and honey cakes and stuffed dates. And my son, an older son, was home. It was a lot of fun. He dressed up as a slave, and they organized our terrace outside to be an ancient Egyptian terrace with a low table and cushions around it, and they all had lotus blossoms on their hairs. And they cooked this food, and they learned hieroglyphics. They made hieroglyphic name tags, and one of my sons made an ancient Egyptian game board for them, so the whole family, of course, could enjoy it. And the one son dressed as a slave, and he washed their hands with a silver ewer, and he helped them cook. So I really didn't have to do very much. They had a wonderful time. They learned a great deal of ancient Egypt. And when my daughter went to the Kunsthistorische Museum, she was so excited to see all the Egyptian things. And we did something similar with the Middle Ages. So we made bread plates, and they had long medieval costumes. So on the whole, my children really love to learn. They've learned a great deal without much of the pain. This program, another thing I really like about it, because my friend did it who homeschools 6 herself, Friday is almost free. Only math on Friday until gymnasium, so that you can either do errands, music lessons, or what we did often, we had another family, friends, who were also homeschooling. After everyone did math, they would come and we would do a nature hike and come back and bring something and draw in our nature notebooks. And then have lunch. Or we would, if it was a bad day, we would do science experiments inside. So that was kind of a special science day. Sometimes we would use that day for a field trip. Because we had friends who were also homeschooling, we always shared one course with the older ones, a literature history course. And we would meet once a week for tea, and we took turns making cookies or zucchini bread or something, and the mothers and the children would read the books. And first there would be social time, and then we would get together and we'd discuss the book. So the mothers would be responsible for writing down seminar questions and leading the discussion. Okay, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how whether it's worked, what's happened to our children. It's probably possible to tell already. So we have 8 children. The oldest is 33. The youngest is 13. I would say all of them are beautiful, sweet, good. They're all practicing Catholics. They not only go to Mass on Sunday, but more often if they can. My oldest is 33. Mine, who is always very active. He's a businessman in London, starting several companies, but also a consultant for a company. Good, that pays while he's starting other companies that don't pay yet. He's married to a girl from the Czech Republic. They have a little girl. And so a week after he graduated from college, he had a job. Well, he could have started the next day, but he gave himself a week vacation. So he had a job in a startup in California. And then when because we were in Europe, he asked if we couldn't find him a job in Europe. And I said, well, how can we find you a job? We're theologians. And he said, theologians have contacts. Think, contacts. So you must know bishops. Bishops are businessmen. Donors. You must have donors to your theological institute. Talk to the donors. So I went to Mass and I said, oh, dear God, Johannes wants a job. And he's very intense when he wants something. Johannes wants a job in Europe. Please, God, tell me what I should do. I came out and there was one of the donors. So I spoke to him. He asked how the children were, and I said my son wanted a job in Europe, and we talked a little bit, and he said, oh, well, I have a son, Johannes, too, and he's the head of JP Morgan in Prague. Maybe he could give him an internship or something. So my son moved to Europe. The next one, Maria, after she went to college, went to Thunderbird International Business School, and she had possibilities for very good marketing jobs, but she preferred to be married and stay home with her children. So she is married to a doctor and has 3 children so far, 5, 3, and 1. And she's already started homeschooling her oldest. My Czech daughter-in-law thought homeschooling was very strange. But now in London, schools are starting at 4 and they're 7 hours long. All of a sudden, she's very interested in homeschooling. She cannot bear the thought of sending her little girl to school for 7 hours a day when she's 4. The next one is 28, and he, after college, entered a monastery outside of Vienna. So he's a monk and now an ordained priest, and he's getting a doctorate in theology, in moral theology like me. He will have a chair of moral theology in a Theologische Hochschule in Austria when he's done. The next one is 24, and he is studying architecture in Bari, Italy, because they have a classical architecture program. So he went to Italy for 3 years over the summer to learn Italian. He did a Rosetta program in Italian, in the United States for 6 months before he went. Then he, for 3 weeks, lived with a family, and then he took an entrance exam. Came in very well, maybe 23rd out of 300, and so now he's in an architecture program and wants to be an architect. The next, Monica, 21, finished college last year. She was valedictorian, so she was the top of her class, and is now just finished Friday her first year of medical school. She wants to be a pediatrician. The next one is 19, and she is studying voice in the university. Has a very beautiful voice. but actually she likes fashion more. So she may be a fashion consultant when she finishes college. But she has a very beautiful voice. So she'll probably always be part of a choir anyway. Andreas, 15, and Hannah, 13, are my only two left to homeschool. So it's pretty sad. My husband and I and our two children look like a perfect American family. But actually, it's only the tip. I want to say this is only the tip of the iceberg, really. He started out loving ancient history. He read every book we could find on battles of the Greeks and the Romans. And then he got really interested in Latin. And this year he took Greek and German at the university, even though he's only 15. Well, he did the rest homeschooling at home. And now he's very interested in linguistics and languages. So he found a graduate student who had piles of books on language and linguistics, and he's been reading them. So I think he will be a university professor someday, and I'm not quite sure what. Maybe linguistics, maybe ancient history. He also wants to write novels, historical novels. He's a beautiful writer. And poet. He reads epic poetry, and he has started writing an epic poet about King David. Really beautiful and amazing. Hannah, 13, is completely non-academic. She loves horses. She rides 4 times a week, and she works at a stable, which pays for the riding, which is good. She loves plants. She has, we have a very small garden area and porch, which she has filled with hundreds of plants, especially orchids. She loves orchids. She's interested in history, though. She loved the Egypt, and she loved the Middle Ages, which we did this year. But what she says she really wants to do is go to equestrian school and learn how to run a stable or do something with horses. So we'll see. She's only 13, so that could change. But in any case, they haven't turned out to be social misfits, or none of them are digging ditches because they can't do anything else. They're very different. They're very social. We've always had them play with other children in the afternoon. We've never had a TV, very few movies. So they've read lots of books, and they've spent time with people. And they've become beautiful people that are my best friends, who I love with all my heart. My daughter now calls me very often. Her husband works a great deal because he's a doctor, so she'll call me and say, "I'm so lonely. He's working all night. Everyone's in bed," and she tells me all the nice things that happen with her children, which is very sweet. It's amazing to be friends with your older children. It's beautiful. The next thing I wanted to talk to you about is what the church teaches about our duty to educate. So John Paul II wrote a great deal about encouraging parents, saying, "Parents, you are the first heralds of the gospel to your children." And there are a number of documents in the church from the popes telling parents that it's better not to have any children if you don't raise them in the faith. That human life is not just physical. And so you haven't really given birth to a human being at the birth. You still need to, of course they're a human being, but full human life includes faith, culture, love. And so you need to, John Paul II was very strong on this, you need to raise them in a communion of love so that they'll learn love. You need to teach them that you can only find yourself by giving yourself, and that they learn best in the family. And although one time it was maybe different, at this point, to pass on the faith is very difficult if the children go to school. Not only because of the books they read and the teachers they have, but especially because of the peers that they're with. So it's our duty to pass on our faith, and the ones who generate children are the ones who have the duty to educate them. And that can't be taken away. So the state does not have the right to educate children. You parents may delegate their authority to the state for a time to educate them. but it never belongs to the state. It always belongs to the parents. Parents are the first and most important educators of their children. There are many documents of the church on this, and they've been used successfully in the United States to protect parents homeschooling who are Catholic, to say this is part of their religion. So it's not necessarily the best thing for every child, but it's something definitely that you need to think about, because it is your duty to do the best thing for your child, and that means to raise them in a way that they learn to live in a relationship of love, in a communion of love, and they learn about their faith in a living and beautiful way. Nothing can take the place of the parents' love and the parents' example, the parents reaching or making a cave of love for the child to grow up to and experience what the Trinity is. The Trinity is a relationship of love. And the way we're supposed to experience that first is in the family. So I understand it's not very legal in Slovakia, but I encourage you to work to make it legal, because it's so beautiful. It's so much better for the children. And as parents, it's your duty to do the best thing for your children. One of the things that's so beautiful is that it increases the love between the parents, I think. It makes being married more interesting. You have more to share. You've probably already seen that when you have a child. You're sharing your love of the child. But when you're sharing the education of the child, that adds a great deal of richness. So you talk together about what books should be read to the child, what the child should study, where you should go on field trips. The more that the father can be involved too, the more beautiful the marriage, the more beautiful the family, and the stronger and happier the children will be. There's an amazing strength of character and ability to take risk in children who are surrounded by this love, and they become very self-confident. They look you straight in the eye, even when they're teenagers and 16, they look you straight in the eye, they shake hands with you, they're ready to talk to any adult or any child. They mix very well with people of all different ages. School just gets you used to school. There's no other situation where you have to sit still for this many hours, put up your hand if you have to go to the bathroom, that you're only with people your exact age. It's a very unnatural situation, actually. It doesn't prepare you for most jobs or for family or for life. So my children definitely learned a lot about taking care of small children, about cooking, about cleaning, about time organization by living in a family and homeschooling. My children, when they've gone to the university, they said, it's so much easier for us because we've homeschooled, because we're used to organizing our time. These people all wait so the day before papers due, and then they write the paper all night. And we look at our calendar, we say rough draft here, outline here, rough draft here, first draft here, and it's done. So they're used to being self-motivated. As they get older, I expect them to do more and more on their own. They learn to do more on their own. And they learn that if they do it on their own, then they're free. They're free to do the things they love. So my son, who's studying architecture, with his free time, when he was 13, he became very interested in architecture. He drew Baroque cathedrals and Rathaus. He drew city plans. He borrowed a set of books on Baroque architecture, which he studied. He studied any book on architecture that he could get. He would go to cities, like Bratislava. Anytime a friend was going somewhere, Vienna, Rome, anytime he could go to a great city, he would go, and he would go to the main piazzas and measure the distance between the buildings, where the fountains were, where the streets came in. He would make plans. He would get plans also off the internet. He would go to great churches and figure out the geometry. He became interested in geometry because of finding the golden mean in buildings. So he did a huge amount on architecture, just 13, 14, 15, doing this. He wrote a whole history of the world as a preliminary to a city that he was designing. So he started with Noah's grandchild and wrote the history down to the Baroque ages of one family and how they founded the city on a cliff in a certain imaginary country. He wrote down the fish and the lakes, the whole geography of this country, this imaginary country, the plants, the soldiers, the armor, and then he spent years designing the capital city of this imaginary country, and the cathedral and the government buildings. So the one who was a monk, very sweet and mild, was very interested in the Catholic revival in England. So he read all the novels, autobiographies, biographies he could about that. And he did my dishes after lunch. He did the breakfast and lunch dishes every day for years, which was beautiful. And he walked down the mountain where we lived. Instead of getting a ride with me, he walked down. And he would visit with some friends, and then he always prepared the altar for Mass. So he knew where he was going. Every child has amazing, secret, mysterious things inside them. And when you're homeschooling, you discover them and you can let them grow. You can give them opportunities, amazing opportunities to do what they want to do. So if they're in school all day, then they have homework, and they have maybe a few lessons. Like if they have music lessons, they have to practice, or sports. There's hardly time for them to discover what's inside, the talents that are inside. Whereas with a lot of time, they discover these things. So at first, I think if you change from school to homeschool, children might be bored. But if they're used to it, if you leave them alone and expose them to many beautiful things, they'll discover their interests and follow them. It's a very exciting adventure. So maybe the best thing is for me to open it up for questions now. Ask the questions that you have. I can also describe other people who do it different ways, but maybe you would like to ask some questions. Yes?
Thank you very much for your talk. I would have many questions. But to start with,
yes?
Please could you repeat the book that made you...
Oh, the book that made me want to do it was called For the Children's Sake. It was by Susan Schaefer Macaulay. There's another book that I like very much, more recent, which is called For Real Learning. And the person who wrote For Real Learning, it's with a 4. She has a website, which is very interesting. For Real Learning. She wrote a book, and she also has a website.
Maybe I can share those bits maybe afterwards.
But you said you had many questions.
Yes, but, well,
You can have one more.
we will have many questions with my brother. Okay. Then I have two very practical questions
Yes.
About internet and some PlayStations and I don't know things I don't even know about at this time. How did you get these things?
Well,
As you said,
I'm
you
so
have no
old
television.
that there wasn't even a problem to begin with. And then we lived on a mountain, so we never had a TV. Before we got married, we said never any TV. And for many years, we had no possibility for movies. But we allowed them to watch a movie once in a while at a friend's, but they had to call us and tell us. They only played at our friends' houses. They had to call and ask us if they could. With the internet now, I think it's a huge problem. We have a family computer which is in my office, which is a pain in the neck, but so I'm watching it, and it goes on at a certain time and it goes off at a certain time. So you not only can't internet, you can't get anything before when I should be up or after I should be in bed. And then each child has their own site with a certain amount of time for the internet. And then it dies on them. And there's a babysitter, internet nanny software that is supposed to get rid of, to prevent them from accessing any adult sites. And there's also a history, which I should be looking at every day to see what sites they did go to, but I'm not very good about that. But one should have these backgrounds. I have heard, if children are at home, and obviously especially boys, they can, we've turned off the pop-ups, so there's no pop-ups, because that's one of the worst things, is a pop-up comes up and you push it and then you get something that you really shouldn't get. Also, phones, you have to be very careful with phones if they have, or iPods. You don't want them to have Kindles. You don't want them to have anything where they can search the internet without fixing it. You can fix those things. There are programs where parents can prevent a phone from going onto the internet, or can prevent the Kindle from getting anything else. But I'm not very good at all that. My husband is much better. But it's a really serious problem because your children can suddenly be on a very terrible site that you really don't want them to see.
And did they accept it, or you had to fight about it?
Oh no, they totally accept it. No, one of my children accessed something bad once, and after that, no, no, they totally accept it. But actually, when you homeschool, very rarely do you have rebellion. You don't even go through a sort of teenage rebellion, because you love and respect each other, and they see that you're laying down your life for them. I mean, there's a time when they're more critical, but with none of the 8 children have we had really much, anything in the way of rebellion. There's a time when they're more critical where they're telling me, like my oldest daughter was telling me, I really should take all the boys to more sports and that I should get together with more. We were living in Austria, but we were speaking English at home. But since we were homeschooling in English, their German was not very good because my husband wasn't very good about speaking German to them because he spoke English to me. So my oldest daughter was criticizing me for not teaching them German and saying I really should get them together with Austrian families every day and I should make sure they were playing sports with Austrians and this and this and this. And I was saying, well, I'm homeschooling all morning and afternoon I'm studying. I do need a little bit of life also, and I want them to play with the best people. And we were in a community which was, so I liked them playing with the children of the other professors who mostly spoke English. So I said, these are the people who I think are, who I love, who are my friends, and I want them to play with them. And I think that's more important than learning English. Well, I'm learning German. Well, now that my daughter has 3 children, things look very different. But anyway, she never rebelled. She just thought that I wasn't doing everything as perfectly as I could. And now she has more appreciation for things that I was going through. Of course, it's very helpful if you have a community, a Gemeinschaft, if you have friends who think the same way you do, and you can discuss your rules, and you can somehow put your rules in line so that you agree, for instance, that you're not going to have the children play video games when they come over, or you can ask your friends, things like that. We had many agreements with our friends. I didn't let the children, they played almost no video games. We didn't have any in our house, and I asked my friends no more than 10 minutes ever. I think that's a real waste of time. Were you going to ask something?
So, thank you very much for the talk. It's been very filling to me. I'm in a state, in the preliminary stage, I'm not ready yet.
Good to think about it now.
Yeah, that will be very interesting. I have 2 questions. One is concerning the capacity, or the, I would call the capacity of the parent to to sufficiently educate the children. It seems to me that you and your husband have a good deal of like systematic and intellectual habits and background.
Mm-hmm.
So that my question, simply put, is how good in this way you have to be as a parent in order to
Yes.
qualify for this role?
It's a very good question. And it's, I think, one of the most beautiful things about homeschooling is that you get to learn with the children. So it's true that my husband and I were both very educated, but I learned many things by teaching. So, and that's a very good way to learn. So I learned a great deal of Latin by teaching. So I've been teaching Latin now for many years. My Latin is pretty good. Even though my children usually, at a certain point, they start sitting in on a class in college. But I've done the subjunctive many times, so I've gone pretty far. With art history, we read the children a history of painting in 6th grade, a history of sculpture in 7th grade, a history of architecture in 8th grade. And we tried to go and look at those paintings, at those sculptures, even the buildings. We drove around Europe looking at those buildings. So I didn't know very much about that, but I learned it by teaching it to them. That's one of the things I've loved the most is I'm not so domestic, so I really enjoy teaching more than cooking. And I have a great excuse, so I'm always learning new things. And because each child has special interests that I try to find and follow, like astronomy. I didn't know much about astronomy, but I had a child who loved astronomy, so we went to an observatory at night, and we bought books about stars. So I think parents who love their children and are willing to do the work, especially if you begin from the beginning, you can do it. You can always stay ahead of your child. You read the book. Teachers, when they're teaching the first year, they have to just read one chapter ahead, you know. We can all do that. In gymnasium then, in high school, I have sometimes hired someone to be a tutor. So my daughter's in medical school now, love math, and it's not my special favorite. So I hired a university student to come once a week. And he was wonderful, and he loved it, and she loved it. Another homeschooling family sent their son, so the two of them did it together. And he invented great word problems about pizzas, and it was beginning calculus, but he made it so exciting and fun for them. So that was great. And German, because my German isn't so great, we had a German tutor. So we've had some tutors for certain subjects. And a student, either higher high school students or university students are often happy to earn a little money doing it, or just to be invited to be part of the family in doing it, so to have a meal or whatever to do it. So that is a way, but I think parents should be more self-confident, that they can learn with the children and it will enrich their life. And the child will enjoy the fact that the parent's learning too. In a way, it makes it less daunting if the parent has to learn it too. So I think there may be subjects where it would be helpful to get a tutor, but there are many things that you really can do. But it is easier if you start from the beginning. So if you were never good at math, and you took your child out when they were in gymnasium, that could be very painful. But if you've been doing the math every year, then you move along with them. And it doesn't take so much time. You know, if you, we have great books in the United States that are many of them are designed for homeschooling families. So they're math books that actually explain thing and give an example. So you read that with them and do the examples, then have them do one and make sure they understand it, and then they can do the rest by themselves. So in 20 minutes or half an hour, you teach them and you learn it at the same time, and then they go on. One other thing is, if you have more than one family doing it, you can help each other a little bit. So this year, I taught Latin to 2 of my daughter's friends and her, to the 3 of them. And one of her friend's mother did science experiments with them. So that was nice. I would have enjoyed doing the science projects, but I was finishing my dissertation, so I was happy. They did electricity experiments. I was happy enough not to have to do that. So that's also a possibility.
Thank you. And I have a second question, which concerns the financial situation of the family, or more precisely, like how important it is to have a big house in order to homeschool several kids, or how important or what role of like different people serving in your house. What was the role of like housemates helping you with it, or like can you homeschool if you don't have
money? Yes.
What can be called a sufficient amount of money? Thank you.
That's certainly an important consideration. I have homeschooled in a very small area, and even in a big house now, I usually do it right on the dining room table because there's lots of light, there's a beautiful view, and I like it there. Which means that I have to put away all the books when we eat, but I still like being right there. So if you have a table to eat on, you have a table that you can do homeschooling in, and I have baskets that go under the sofa with the homeschooling books in it. So you don't need a lot of space. Of course, the more children you have, it's nice to have more space, but it's not absolutely necessary. Having 8 children, and my husband was the founding president of a theological institute, so I had a lot of entertaining, and then I was studying myself, and still having my 2 last babies, I really don't think I could have done it all without household help. So for a while, for 2 years, I had an au pair, a nanny who lived in, who did housework rather than taking care of children. I want to take care of my own children, but they did housework for me. And in fact, the first, who was absolutely the dearest person, married one of the professors, and we're going to go stay with them in a few weeks. So that was a very happy ending. Otherwise, and for a while I had someone who came in actually every day and did a little housework and laundry. But for most of the time, I only had someone who came once a week and cleaned. And that's not absolutely necessary, but I did have very many children, and I'm not very domestic, so I was very grateful to have enough money for that. And I was extremely grateful that my husband encouraged me to stay home with the children. So now I'm teaching, but only Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, and they're very kind to let me say exactly when I want to teach my classes. So when I prepare, I'm sitting in my office next to the family computer. So I'm home most of the time, and I even have office hours at our house, which is very close to the university. It can be certainly a sacrifice not to have a second income, but we've looked into it, and friends have looked into it, and you know, if you only need 1 car, and you don't need special clothes for working, and you're home so you can spend time, so you don't have to go to a restaurant or pick up food, carry out food, but you prepare everything yourself at home, you do save money only having 1 person work. I mean, it can balance out more than you might think. I see also just, well, I guess it's different everywhere, but in the United States, there's a lot of papers to fill out for health insurance, and for taxes, you can save a lot more money or less money, depending how much paperwork you're willing to do. So having someone who's there on top of things actually can save a lot of money, not only losing money for not working. It's good to teach your children how to do things, and my children are all much more domestic than me. Even my boys can cook really well, and they know how to take care of children much better than I did when I got married. So it's been a learning process for me, and I think all of my children will be better managers than I was. I was very blessed that we could afford help. I know my daughter now, his husband is a doctor, so he's very busy, and she has a 5-year-old, 3-year-old, and 1-year-old. She does at least have someone who comes once a week to clean, which is really nice. But there's also a certain poverty of spirit that says, my children are so important to me that I'm willing to let go a little bit on the house. So I'm willing to live with a little bit more less mess, a little bit less fancy cooking. If people come over, I'm just going to try not to be embarrassed. Because if you have children home all the time, and there's not really any time when it's totally clean, except when they're asleep. Because where there are children, there's mess. That's just life, you know? So you send your children to daycare or to school all day, then you're going to have a nice clean house. And if people judge you by that, that's hard to be judged by that. So there's a certain humility to say, No, I accept having a messy house for 20 years because I want to have my children at home. But it's actually not important to have a spotless house. And many people find it friendly and less threatening because they don't feel, oh, is my house this clean when they come over. Also with entertaining, for many years I always served the same dish every time I had people over. Pasta with tomato sauce, salad, and brownies and ice cream. The children made the brownies, and I just thought, I'm so busy. I want to invite people over often, and we don't have a lot of money, and I don't have the time to make a gourmet meal, so I can make this well, and people just got used to having, they'd be disappointed if every once in a while I cook something else. They said, oh, we went to the Boston's and there's pasta. There's no pasta. So, and I would try to cook for my friends who had babies, but simple. I have friends who have tried different things. I have friends who both teach in a high school, and they teach half-time both or three-quarters time. At first, so one of them could always be home, and they homeschooled. So they're different solutions. But then they decided they preferred to teach at the same time and have their children sleep late. They had an older child, so that they could all be together for most of the day. So they live in Spain, so they stay up till midnight, and the children sleep till noon. And they're home soon after that because they get up early and teach the first year hours in the gymnasium. Yes.
Thank you for sharing your experiences. And I'd like to ask you, because I think the big argument against homeschooling is that children are kind of isolated. Yes. What would be the argument against it? You already said some about maybe you are trying to...
That's often an argument, but if I think about the social life in my school, it's exactly what I don't want for my children. There were certain children who were victims, and everyone was mean to them. They said, she has cooties, stay away from her. And when we got older, certain children were cool, and there were cliques. So I'm happy if my children don't have to have that socialization. We've always had our children play with other children, or when they're older, be with other children in the afternoon. And they've been on sports teams and music lessons. They're very well socialized. They're extremely charming, popular. If I do say so myself, they're lovely people. And mostly the homeschooling families that I know, the children are refreshing because even when they're teenagers, they look you right in the eye, which I don't know if you've noticed, but it makes me so sad how many teenagers won't look you in the eye anymore. At a certain point, they become closed. So my experience is of very good socialization, but obviously you have to make an effort to get them together with other children. But it's easy if you know other homeschoolers because it's so efficient that they get done sooner in the day. They have more time. And they learn they keep learning how to deal with people of different ages. They don't feel like they have to be with someone just their age to have fun. There are some weird families who are isolated and keep their children very separate, but nobody needs, they're weird families that send their children to school also, so.
And another part of this argument would be that they are kept in very isolated, safe environment, I would say. So how they dealt with the situations when they met the real life of, you know what I mean?
Yes.
When they,
so I think we all want our children to be in a very safe, loving environment to begin with, where they're surrounded by only goodness and beauty, and they learn about communion of persons in a family. Then, as they get older, you have to let them know that the whole world isn't like this, and inevitably some of your friends are going to have problems, and they're going to find out about them. They're going to read novels that discuss problems, and you will let them watch movies and talk to them about them. So there'll be a transition point. But I think if you are brought up in a very safe, affirming environment, you become very self-confident. You know why you're on earth, where you're going, and so you're ready to face problems. You're much more ready to face problems than people who don't know what life's about. So I think a healthy person who's been affirmed and in some way isolated in a very unusually loving, healthy environment will be much more able to face problems later. That's my experience, and my children have done very well. I know one of my sisters-in-law just was very hard on me and said these things, and our children were not grow up normal. And when she heard our third child wanted to be a priest, she said, "What a terrible priest he's going to be. He's not going to be able to help anyone because he's never seen real life." And really, I was crying all the way from Vienna to Salzburg. She was driving us there, and I was sobbing because she was so hard. Even though I thought it's wrong, but I couldn't. It hurts very much when someone you love is saying these hurtful things. But in fact, now he's the Seelsorger for the university students at the Theologische Institute there at Heidenkreuz. He's just, I think, if you know what a healthy family is, you know what a healthy relationship is, then you're able to help people who are not in a healthy relationship because you know what a healthy relationship does look like. So I think you're much more able to help people who are disturbed if you're not disturbed. If you know what's good and what's right and what's normal, what should be normal. Seems to make sense. Yes?
We have several questions here. So first question is, if we go back to the internet, is
Yes.
it good to use educational software programs, or would you prefer just books?
Well, as children get older, it would be pity not to take advantage of some things on the internet, certainly. But the internet is more, as TV movies, they are more invasive, more fast, loud, changeable. And so I would like to put it off and use books and nature to begin with. I think it's more valuable to take a hike and draw a picture of a nest than to see even a wonderful movie about Africa, about lions, usually. And once in a while, something like that. But on the whole, it's better to have contact with real life and to be read to or read. So you receive the information in a different way. And if you're bombarded with images, the more you're bombarded with images, the less you see. It seems like you, if there's just a little, you learn to really notice and take it in and contemplate it in a way. So certainly my children, when my son writes a paper on hurricanes, he'll look at a hurricane on the internet. And that's exciting, but I would rather that he spends more time with books than internet.
Yeah, but because there are very good programs for small children to learn, for example, English phonics. My daughters learn to read English. I wouldn't be able to teach them in such a way. Thank you. Afternoon lessons. Let's say if children are with other children at sports or music classes, isn't it the same as school, that there are school children and they are in the same environment as if they were at school?
Well, music not, because it's usually just the music teacher and the student. Perhaps with sports. And so you have to think about the people who are on the team and how much time you want them to spend in it. But if you're not in a school, then they can't put the same pressure on you. So my son now is on a football team from a small private school. And I asked him if he feels peer pressure, and he said, of course I do. But he's home most of the day. Those boys can, and mostly he's very well liked, but if those boys tease him for something, he can shrug it off because he's not with them all day. So what they think of him just isn't such a big deal. And if he has two who are friends with him, he can stay with those who two are friends. And if some of them want to be mean to him, or some of them are passing around pornography or something, he can just avoid them. So of course you want to look at any group that they're with. And it's very nice if your children can play mostly with children of friends who think the same way you do. But it's less pressure to conform.
Can I have a last question? Latin. You taught your children Latin, and what is the main reason why you taught Latin to them?
I think it's excellent for the mind because it's inflected. I'm sorry, I don't know enough about your language, but it's inflected and it's very orderly. So they learn something which in English is not inflected. So, and learning it in a structured way, I like. Although many people teach Latin in a living language way, but I like them learning the paradigms, because I think it's very good for them to learn that structure. It teaches them to think better. And when they have to analyze a sentence, diagram it, and explain what part of speech and everything is, that's pretty high level analysis for a child at that age. But it's something they can do. But also it's the language of the church. So wherever we've lived, there have always been some masses in Latin, hymns in Latin. My husband and I are both theologians, so we deal with Latin texts all the time, St. Thomas and St. Augustine. So.
But as for the linguistic part of the language, would let's say Spanish do the same thing as for conjugation and
no,
intonation?
It's not. It has lost a lot of the inflections, so it's not as good for the mind. But learning any language, I think, is good for the mind. Yes.
Hi. Thank you very much for your lecture and talk and a little bit more of your experiences. I have actually 3 questions that you are connected. We are all living in an environment that provides and also requests feedback. So how did you do feedback to your children? Especially we did it by grading system. So did you have to use it, or how did you use it?
Well, as far as the state was concerned, when we homeschooled in Austria, it was very easy, and now it's very hard. But it turned hard the year after we left. While we were there, the children just had to go to Vienna once a year and take tests. And the tests were allowed to be in English. And they basically only tested their reading ability and their math ability. So there was almost no content testing. So we could teach the history, the science, the religion that we wanted. In the United States, in Florida, the children either have to be tested once a year, or they have to speak for half an hour with a public school teacher who looks at their books and their papers and talks to them about what they did. So Hannah has done that, and Andres has done the test. I had Hannah do both this year to get used to the test, but again, it's mostly, the test is reading, grammar, writing style, and math. So again, the content, there's really no, we can teach what we want in science, history, religion. Different states in the United States are different. So that's as far as the state goes. As far as my making sure what the children are learning, I have never used grades because I want them to learn because they love it, or at least because they trust me that it's important for them. So let's say only a few of my children have loved math, but they trust me that when I say, you really need to learn this. So I do give them, for instance, at the end of each week in Latin, I give a test and I correct it, but I never talk about the grade. I just make them redo the ones that they got wrong. And they've done very well. So when one of my children went to college, they said, I think you should have given us a few more tests because I got really scared the first time. But he did really, really well. So he did the top and everything. So it didn't seem to harm him too much.
So So thank you. You actually answered my second question about standards of education. And the third one was, did you have to use negative motivation, like punishments or anything else?
Only for my first, my darling Johannes with a strong will. And he made the others obey me.
What kind did you use?
With him, I would tell him to do something, and I would come back and he hadn't done it. I would call my husband at work, at the university, and my husband would talk to him on the phone and say, I'm going to call back in 45 minutes, and I want it done, and if it's not done, I'm going to come home and spank you. And he would call back, and if he hadn't done it, he would really come home from the university and spank him. And this is pretty old-fashioned, but it worked. And yeah, but the others never really gave me that much time. Sometimes they just don't.
How old was he?
Well, I would say up to 13, there were these battles. Yeah.
How about positive motivation?
Positive motivation? Well, the first is just when you're done, and you can play or read whatever you want. If someone seems to need more motivation, then sometimes I give it. For instance, if someone is having a hard time learning how to read, then I say I'll give you $1 for every book that you read. Or if you finish this many books, we'll do this and this. But mostly, they haven't needed that. I mean, it's surprising, but children love to learn if it's presented in a good way. And if they're read to, then they know how exciting books are. They want to get to that point when they can do it themselves. Yeah, so it hasn't been too much of a problem. I know some people give stars, and some people have a different system. So some people have many workbooks, and then sometimes it takes more to get them through those workbooks. And again, the main thing seems to be when you're done, you can go play. So just get it done, because you're not leaving this table till it's done. But I have tried, and I like this because it's reading historical novels that they love anyway, or reading really interesting things in science, nature walks or experiments, trying to do things that are actually interesting. So very few workbooks, few things that are in themselves I would not want to do.
Excuse me, but in Slovakia we have a very strict syllabus and standard that we have to do, like we have to fill in certain workbooks, and it's a little bit difficult to learn in a way that interests them, for example, mathematics or even Slovak, the language.
Well, I know some people who have been struggling in Austria, and they have these workbooks. And the Newtons, they came and gave a talk here. Their children, they just get through the notebooks very fast in the day, and then the rest of the day they can read, play outside, or do more interesting things. So they just say to them, sorry, this is what you have to do, just get through it. So they just get through it as fast as they can, and then they can do things they like more. You could try, I mean, in such a system, you could try to read something interesting about what that is about so that it's not so tedious. So if it's science, expose them to the stars if they have to read about astronomy, or read a novel about history if they have to do the history, to try to make it more interesting.
And as for the system of teaching, where are you on the scale from classical education up to unschooling? Do you use different approaches for different subjects?
Well, this Mother Divine Grace calls itself a classical education. As a matter of fact, so all my children have learned Latin. They've all had a lot of literature, memorizing poetry. However, I give them a great deal of freedom to pursue what they want. So I have given them certain things, but then I've allowed them to many hours to pursue what they want. So they write on what they're interested in.
And they were accountable that, okay, I did this, and then I can go and pursue my interests, right? That they had to do what you assigned them to do.
Yes, or if possible, try to connect what they had to do with their interests. So with architecture, history, geometry, all kinds of things could be connected in.
But especially with the smaller children, it's a bit difficult to...
So then just get it done quickly. And it's amazing how quick it is if you have just one. And then there's lots of time for other things. You just sit down and get it done. And what could take 5 years with a class of 25-year-olds can take an hour with one child and a mother. And then, so no matter how boring it is, if it's 1 hour or 1.5 hours, then they can do with more beautiful things.
Yeah, we have the girls wake up at 6:30 to do everything and be done by 10, as you said. It lasted only for a week.
Only for a week. Oh. Yes.
You mentioned that you still have some years to homeschool.
Yes.
And I just want to ask whether it is possible, for example, or have you considered to homeschool your grandchildren? Is it possible? Or?
I have, and I would love it, but they don't live close enough. Yes. Yes, and people. Yes. In the town where we live, there are a number of grandparents living there too. It's Florida, so the grandparents, when their children move there, they say, well, we'll retire there. So a number of grandparents are helping with homeschooling. And I do when my grandchildren are with me, but unfortunately, one lives in London and the other 3 live in Denver, and we live in Florida. And so although we fly back and forth quite a bit, I can't really do a lot. I could do some. I know one grandfather who does it by Skype. So he meets once a week with his granddaughter by Skype. He gives her books to read, and he reads it too, and then they have a discussion. She writes an essay and emails it to him, and he corrects it. So it's possible. And beautiful. And my mother helped us. Every year at the beginning of the school year, she would come and stay with us. And she would take care of the younger ones, take them on a long walk while I got the older ones started so that they had because a good beginning is very helpful. So after 3 really solid weeks beginning, then they would be working on their own very well. And at the same time, she would tell me to entertain. So I would have all the people that I knew I would have to entertain. In that semester, as many as I could, I'd have them in that 3 weeks when my mother was there. And she was helping me. But she didn't live with us most of the time, so. But it's ideal to have grandparents helping.
So you organize the time in school year as well? As in school?
Well, we're much more flexible. So for instance, now we're in Europe for a month, and the school in the United States is going for another month.
So did you have holidays and so?
So we finished a month early. We read some things really fast at the end.
So
But-
we have kind of holidays in homeschooling.
You can have your own holidays.
Yes, but you usually have it, right? Some days of no homeschooling, like on weekends and
Yes,
summer.
certainly. Yes, and when my older children and grandchildren would come visit, we might take a week off or go visit them in Denver or in London or something and take a week. We would have a educational field trip to London.
Can you please tell us a little bit about the spiritual life of your family, how you bring the faith to your children? I agree that's the most important thing.
Yes, that's the most important thing. Well, we pray with them in the morning when they get up, and we always pray a decade of the Rosary and bless people and sing some hymns in the evening by Mutagota's statue. We teach them religion from a very good religion series, and we read some books of the scripture out loud to them. I've always done many things for the liturgical year. So I always have a purple tablecloth for Advent and Lent, and then a white one at Easter. We have an Easter candle. We make a moss garden, and now my daughter's 13. I asked her if she still wanted to, and she said, "Of course I do." But where we have the 3 crosses, and then on Good Friday, we wrap Jesus in, who's a Playmobil figure. We wrap him in white cloth with herbs, spices, and put him in a tomb that we made out of rocks and clay. And we have Playmobil Roman soldiers on the ground. And then the first person who comes in the house after the Easter Vigil raises Jesus from the dead. So my parents had many customs, and my husband's family had customs, and so we try to do them all. And the children love them. And if I forget anything, they're not happy. And now, if possible, my older children with the grandchildren come, and so they love doing the same things. And they're doing the same things. My son will call from London and say, "What was it that you cooked on Holy Thursday?" Because we always have a Seder, like the Last Supper. So, and like my mother tried, I have reproductions of great paintings for the feast days up, and read stories of the saints. But I think, and we've tried to go to daily mass always and take them along until they're old enough to decide. And most of them have decided they want to try to, if they can. My son in London goes to a 20-minute businessman mass in London.
Until which age was it mandatory that they had to go along with you?
Somewhere between 13 and 16, they could decide. For the boys, if they can serve, it makes it much easier for them to like going to daily mass. And we are theologians, so we talk about theology quite a bit. And my husband loves to give slideshows of great paintings of Christ's life, or Mary Magdalene, or Joseph. And we have always lived in a Catholic community. So they have experienced, so their friends have been children of our friends who they also see at Mass, and who do many of the same things we do because we trade ideas. So it seems very natural to them. Because the most important thing is to pray and try to love Christ oneself, and that will be attractive because it's beautiful. The first time I went to visit my first child to get married, who's my oldest daughter, not my oldest son, we were living in Austria and they were living in Phoenix. And she was graduating from business school, so I flew there to go to her graduation. And I walked into their apartment and I got tears in my eyes because there was a big Austrian cross on the wall, and they were playing beautiful music. And I just, from the whole sense of the apartment, I could feel that we passed on what we wanted to pass on, that they were living a beautiful Catholic life. So there can't be anything more beautiful than that. And the older ones now are concerned for the younger ones too. So that's beautiful, that they feel responsible for them too.
Okay, can we have the last questions?
Yes?
I would like to ask about if a child is very good in a certain field of education, let's say mathematics.
Yes.
Would you recommend to go as quickly as possible with this in this area, or rather to calm down and spend more time on something which the child is not so good?
I think if a child loves something, then you should make it possible for them to pursue it. But I don't think you should allow them to drop other things that are good. So you wouldn't want someone to pursue mathematics and not read great literature or learn about science, or especially religion. So you want everyone to be a full, rounded human being, but you certainly want to help someone with a talent pursue it. And often other things then can get connected to it. But I would, if someone was interested in mathematics, definitely get a tutor for them if they were going beyond me, and give them books about more fun mathematics, mathematicians, introduce them to mathematicians. I would certainly try to make that possible, to pursue that, but I wouldn't drop other things. Maybe eventually, but I would definitely want them to have the literature, religions, history also. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Yeah?
the last question.
Yes?
It's not for him. Did you have your children write papers for the subjects? Or like
I did, and I tried to make them write papers about what they loved. So my son who loved history, he would write papers about English history. That was what he was interested in. And my son who loved architecture wrote papers about Baroque architecture. They had to write certain papers for the history and literature class, but I did not make them write as many papers as I should have, and as much as possible I've tried to make it possible for them to write about what they loved. This school has the possibility that you sign up officially. You don't need to sign up officially. Then you can have a teacher, which of course you have to pay for, and then the child can send the papers to the teacher, and the teacher by email, and the teacher sends them back corrected. That can be good for motivation too. So just the last 2 children, I did that for high school, and they definitely wrote more papers and rewrote them because it was for someone that wasn't mama. So that was helpful.
Has there been a time when teaching was difficult for you?
Yes. Especially because of my dear oldest son. So there would be times when usually we'd meet my husband at 5 o'clock Mass. There'd be at times when I think, I'm just not going to make it through the day without Jesus at noon, and so I would go find a noon Mass and get communion because I just thought I can't make it.
You went to the children?
Yes, I took the children. Which is also sometimes trying, but I always took the children with me. Mostly I've loved it, but he did push me to the limit sometimes.
I'm sorry.
Yes, please do. Absolutely.
Perhaps they don't do homeschooling yet.
Yes, let's.
Lebo neviem, že či z vás niekto robí domácu školu, alebo sa snaží robiť domácu školu. Keby niekto teda mal záujem, lebo my sme vlastne tieto 3 rodiny robíme domácu školu, a teda až máš takže keby má niekto záujem, tak by sme mohli dať po prípade kontakt a ak vieme, by sme mohli pomôcť, alebo aspoň teda vás nejak tak privítať do tej homeschoolskej rodiny tu na Slovensku, lebo je nás okolo asi 30 organizácií.
S tými sympatizantami, ale teda tá situácia na Slovensku je trošku taká inakšia.
Takže len to len vyhýbať a sám človek v tom čase
Excellent. That's excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was great to meet you. I wish you the best for your children and your families.